Hello, and you join me today at Fields End Water in Cambridgeshire, and I'm going to take you through my approach to pellet waggler fishing. We're fishing the pool, which is a lovely lake. I think there's about 4 or 5 lakes on the complex. There's caravanning, there's lodges you can stay in on the other lakes. It's absolutely fantastic. I've fished there a couple of times before doing features and that, but what a place. It just gets better and better. And I hardly have many people talking about it. We're fishing the pool, which is like an oblong lake, but it goes into a bend at the bottom, just kicks round. As you can see, there's pleasure anglers here fishing as well, so you haven't got to camp here or stay here to fish. It's a day ticket water. And I'm going to show you my approach to fishing the pellet waggler. Right, well here I am, I'm all set up, and it's people complicate themselves when they're fishing in all aspects, all styles of fishing. Fishing's very simple, and hopefully from you watching this short video you'll be able to go out and fish the pellet waggler and have a good day's fishing. Now, to simplify it, fishing the pellet waggler only comes into its own really as the weather warms up, so you're looking probably from late April, May through to September, end of September. But it's a brilliant method and a very easy way to catch fish, especially carp. You want short rods. It's no good fishing a 13, 14 foot rod, 10, 11, 12 foot maximum, because the shorter the rod, the easiest to get them in. You're not casting far, you're casting with a pellet waggler, which an ideal float for fishing, we call it a pellet waggler, is a stubby loaded float and a thick top so you can see it. And you want the float self-cocking. And all pellet wagglers are loaded and self-cocking, but that's the reason. So as soon as you cast and you have no shot down the line, I'll show you my setup in a minute. All I've got is the hook length swivel that I'll put the hook length onto, no shot at all, very simple. And you fish shallow as well. But the most important thing is the feeding. I will feed normally 6 mils because you can get them out at a distance, because you're normally looking to chuck 25 metres. 30 metres maximum. Sometimes you've got to go big chuck, but normal commercial fishing, 25 metres. It's like 2 pole lengths really. And with a 6 mil, you can quite easily feed it to there. And you haven't got to feed loads. As long as you're feeding in 6 to 10 pellets each time, you can put a 6 mil on the hook, banded. Must be banded. I've known a lot of anglers I've took out coaching are fishing soft pellets. You can't even cast with soft pellet. Soft pellet comes off, so it's got to be a banded pellet. And when the carp or the fish takes it, they're hooked. 9 times out of 10, the float goes under and the rod tip goes round. And the most important thing, as I just said before, is feeding. You must regularly feed. Now, if I'm in a match and I'm fishing and I get a tangle, something happens, I've got a clock in my mind to feed. Keep feeding, because once you get the fish there and they're feeding, the only way they'll go away is if you stop feeding. And if you get out of a rhythm, you get a tangle and you stop feeding for 10, 15 minutes, they can go. Pleasure fishing, it's not so bad, but in a match, that could be the end of the game for you, because you've been catching fish, you've got them there, stop feeding, get out the routine, they drift off to the next guy and you've lost them. So the feeding is the most important, well, I think the most important part of pellet waggler fishing. Regular feeding, not too much, getting a rhythm of feeding all the time, and casting when you feed. I can go through that in a minute and show you, but it's very important, the feeding. I think that's the most important thing, the feeding, because if you haven't got fish there feeding, you can forget it. So regular feeding, and I always use normally 6 mil pellets because they'll get to the distance where you're fishing. You know, there are other days when you can mess around and 4 mils are better, 4 mil banded, 6 mil, 8 mil banded, but just general pellet waggler fishing, what I'm trying to take you through today, 6 mils is probably about the best standard pellet to use. Anyway, let's have a look at my setup and show you what I've set up today to fish here. Right, the rod that I'm using today is a Horizon Pro. I've got 11 foot. I like 11 foot rods, they suit me. Like I said earlier, some people might use a 12 foot rod, but I think 10, 11 foot is about the best sort of rods to use. You're not casting far, you're casting a heavy loaded float, and it's just, you've got more control, especially when netting the fish when they come under your feet. The longer the rod, the harder it is to net them. The shorter the rod, the easier it is. So my setup, I've got Horizon monofilament line on there, which I've got, that is 020 on there, which is probably about £8 in strength, and that's quite adequate because I'm only going to fish hook lengths of probably up to 018. So if I've got 020, I can fish up to 018, whereas 020 to 020, you haven't got the right balance, so therefore the main line may snap. So always fishing a lower diameter hook length than to your main line, and if you're still dealing in pounds, don't go poundage higher than your main line, because if you hook a fish and you lose it, you'll only be changing your hook length. The reel I'm using is Horizon 3000, because we're not chucking far, so I'll get away with the 3000. Nice little reel, balances the rod as well. And another important thing is the loading of the spool, making sure that the line comes right to the lip, because it makes it easier to cast. If you've got the line set right back from the lip of the spool, the line's fighting to come off the spool. Whereas if you've got it loaded correctly, it flies off nicely and you just cast much further. Very important, that is. The hook length that I'm using is an MXC4. It's a size 16 to 018 diameter hook length. Now this is a 18-inch hook length, but I've cut it down to 12 inches. And sometimes I may even fish a 6-inch hook length if I need to come shallow, if I find the fish are really shallow, if they're taking the pellet as soon as it goes in. But that's just getting a little bit technical. No, a 12-inch hook length normally is the best balance. There is a nice little band on a loop, and I've attached it, I'll just let a little bit of line out here, to one of their hook length swivels, where I can just pull the sleeve back and put the hook on. It's very light in weight, and also you'll get no twiddle ups because that's a swivel. And with pellet fishing sometimes you get a lot of twiddling where it twiddles up your hook length. That way it will never happen because it's a swivel and it will never tangle. And then I've got my Pellet Waggler that's attached by one of their Pellet Waggler attachments. And I've got a snack link swivel that it comes with. They all come already prepared, easy to put on. And I can change that to whatever size. If the wind gets up, on a slightly heavier one, or if the wind drops, I can put a lighter one. But I've started there with one of their Matrix 8-gram finesse pellet wagglers, nice and slim, and that will do the job. And there it is, very simple. Well, as you can see, I'm feeding now 6mm pellets. I've probably got half a dozen, maybe 8 in there. And I've been regularly feeding out there. I've got a little clock telling me to feed every maybe 20 seconds. And I think it's very important, as I said before, the feeding, that if I stop feeding, I'll lose that rhythm, and those fish out there that feed will go. So I'm constantly thinking about feeding. Very important, and to have a good catapult that keeps the pellets grouped but in an area. I mean, I'm using one of the new slick catapults. This is a heavy one, and this is a lighter one. Now if the wind gets up, I'll change to this one, but at the moment this is doing everything I need with the pellets. I'm putting them in, I'm firing them, it's keeping them in an area, the same area that I'm feeding, where I'm going to cast to in a minute. I'll demonstrate that in a minute, but there's fish there feeding, and I know when I cast that pellet waggler out, they'll have it straight away. So let's get fishing. I'm going to put a banded 6mm on, the same that I'm feeding. They're the Fin Perfect feed pellets, nice light colour. And I've set it probably at about, I would say probably 18 inches. Now before I cast again, I'll feed. And you'll see as you watch, I get in a little bit of a rhythm. So I'll cast now. I'll check it and stop it just past my feed. Look at that one straight away. Because sometimes you drop it, the pellet waggler just past the feed, the pellet waggler makes a splash and the fish thinks it's food, because I've been firing these 6mm out there, and they take it straight away. Did you notice the poly swap there? You see next time. Because I'm cack-handed, as you all know. Now, I'll stick the rod between my legs and I'll feed again. So I'm constantly trying to keep that clock ticking to keep the feed going out there. And the least time I feed when I'm fishing the pellet waggler is probably when I'm netting a fish. It could go a minute sometimes. But because I've been regularly feeding there, it's okay. So I'm going to feed again. Now I'm going to concentrate on getting the fish in. See the swap? Right, let's get this fish in. Nice little mirror carp. I'm still thinking about that feeding, very important. Hold him up. Lovely mirror. Get him back in the water because it's quite warm today. Still got that clock ticking. Got to feed, must feed. So I'll do 2 lots out there. Recheck everything's all okay, same depth. Pop another pellet on. The other thing with the band, I'm using my fingers to put the pellet on, but there is a little pellet banding tool you can use that we have in our range, and if you're a bit heavy-fisted or big fingers, you can use that to put the pellet on. But my little fingers, I get away with just stretching the band and putting it on. Now I cast, I just checked it back past the feed. I'll feed again. Feed again as well. I'll just give it a little turn and just bring it into the feed, the pellet waggler into the feed, so it moves the pellet again. And hope the fish look at it and take it. It went under then. It's gone again. The other thing, never strike. There's no need to strike. If the float goes in, don't do that. But I've done that and caught, I was going to say, because sometimes you can strike and bump them out. But you just pick up and they're normally on. I may even have failed at one there, just demonstrating, just pulling. It's very important I've got the clutch set on my reel for the hook length as well. On that Horizon 3000, I know that a carp will set off, it will pull that line off the clutch and it won't break me. So again, feed again. Keeping that feed going out there. Then cast and stop it just past my baited area. Stop it with my finger. Put the barrel arm over. Feed again. I'll feed again. And I'll just bring it back into the feed. Because normally the float will go under. As the float goes under, your rod tip's going. They just bolt, so because you're fishing shallow, they just shoot off. Lovely way of fishing, really enjoyable, really exciting fishing. Now I'll put the rod between my legs. I know the clutch will do all the work if the carp sets off. Just trying to keep those fish out there on the feed all the time. Doesn't feel like a carp then, but might be a small one. I know there's some chub and some hide in here as well. That's a little carp. They fight so hard in it because the water's so deep. And they just bolt, and because they got the depth to just bore down, and you think you've got a big one on, and comes out, it's just a little tiny carp. But again, I'm thinking, clocking my mind, telling me feed. I put 2 lots out there. Have a little mirror, only a little one. Sometimes the smaller ones fight harder than the big ones. You can get a 9–10 pound fish and easier than a 3–4 pound fish. Well, I'm feeding, there's a lot of swirling out there from the fish. So it tells me something's not quite right. I should be catching. I had 2 in 2 puts and then just nothing on feeding, the fish are there. So I'm just going to increase the depth only by 6 inches and see if that does anything, because normally the slightest change in depth is very crucial when you're fishing a pellet waggler. It can change your catch rate immensely, it's unreal. Just 4 or 5 inches. So by increasing that depth, I'm trying to find where the fish are feeding happiest through my loose feed. So they may be feeding as soon as it hits the water, the fish that I'm seeing, but there might be more lower down feeding. So by going deeper, you give them more of a fall through the water, so you're going through more fish to find out where the majority of the fish are feeding. But I've increased that by 6 inches and it's had no difference. Nothing's happened, so I'll have 1 more cast at that depth. I shall go back then, just shallow back up again. And what I'm going to do now, when I say I'm going to go shallow again, I'm going to put on a smaller, one of their stumpier pellet wagglers. Because I'm going to go back shallow, allow me to go a little bit even shallower still. I'm going to put on one of the original ones. So my attachment, I can just put any waggler on there in their range and it'd be weighted perfectly without adding any shot, because they're weighted to the tip, whatever size, whatever one you put on. But that means I can be that much shallower, so I'm going to pull it down, coming a lot shallower now. Let's see if they're there, if they're right up in the water. I had it straight away again, that did. That's where I've gone shallow, but the amount of fish that are out there is incredible. You think as soon as it landed, it go under straight away, but you just wait a minute, keep feeding it, and then it'll go. Lovely way of fishing. Oh, look like a chub. Oh, I got a chub. Look at that chub. What a beauty. About that for a chub on the pellet waggler. What a beauty. £3 plus, absolutely awesome. put him back. I want to talk about the wagglers that I've been using today, the pellet wagglers. There's the standard ones that come out. There was 4 in a set in those, and then the finesse one, there's 3 in a set in those. Now, difference in these two, they're plastic, both plastic body, both the same bodies, the material that we use for our pellet wagglers. It's a buoyant plastic, very lightweight, and they're loaded with brass, all to the tip. So I can put either one on, and they weight to the same visible top. It's a nice flighted top, so they glide nicely, they cast dead straight. But the most important thing about these two is the thickness. So this is called finesse, it's a thinner tip to the standard one. And the reason being that I would tend to use that, say for smaller carp, or coming into the colder months, if you're fishing the pellet waggler, like coming out of September as it gets colder, and you're still catching a few on the pellet waggler, the thinner top's the one to use. And obviously when they're really having it, the thicker top. Another point about the baits that I've used the Sonia baits Fin Perfect 6mm, and I've actually fished a banded 6mm. But on other days, it might be a banded 4mm, it might be a banded 8mm. But the most important thing is, I've used 6mm because I can feed them the distance I've been fishing today. Another day, with the wind a bit stronger, I might have to use 8mm. It's all about feeding, getting your feeding right, the correct size of pellet to feed to where you're fishing, and you're on a winner then. As long as you can feed to where you're casting that pellet waggler, you will catch. But if you can't feed to where you're fishing, then forget it, because you're getting them fish feeding in an area. It's like you're fishing shallow on the pole, you're doing it closer, you're doing it further out. So if you can't feed to where you're fishing, then it's non-brainer, it won't work. So the correct size of pellet is determined by the wind and how far you're firing out. It's amazing, just the slightest change in depth, how it can change your peg. I thought I got another chub then, but I think it's a carp. But I know I've got the feeding right, but just getting the right depth. I could probably push that up 4 or 5 inches, and I probably wouldn't catch half as many as what I'm catching, even though there's a lot of fish out there. Just found the depth they're happy to feed at. The most important thing with depth is that feeding. What a lovely way to fish the pellet waggler. Absolutely awesome. Well, I think I'm going to end on that one. It has been really a fish, a chuck. We'll get this fish in. We'll just have a recap. But nice to end on a fish. We started on a fish. We end on a fish. There we go. What a lovely day's fishing. Another one of these long, where they need some food in them. Look, great big long mirror. Fully scaled mirror, unbelievable. Well, I thoroughly enjoyed that session, I hope you have. Just a quick recap. What I think is the most important thing with pellet waggler fishing, as you've seen, is the depth, changing the depth, because sometimes 2 or 3 inches makes all the difference. But the feeding is so important as well, the regular feeding. So important. Well, I've really enjoyed it, I hope you have, and I'll catch you on the bank.